Welcome to the Tomorrow Today Podcast, mapping the future of business. My name is Buhle and Graeme.
And I'm Graham Codrington. And in this episode, we'll be talking about one of the most important characteristics of future-ready organizations, antifragility.
We all know how important resilience is in our organizations, our teams, and even personal lives these days. But as we're dealing with all of this constant change, difficulties, and unexpected surprises, the ability to bounce back from adversity becomes really key into the future. As the Chumbawamba song said, I get knocked down and I get up again.
I don't know about you, Buhle, but I'm tired of getting knocked down. It's a great song, but, life is tough. And I think maybe even tougher than it used to be, or tougher than I certainly remember it. Almost everybody I know is exhausted. We're dealing with these changes, these difficulties in our personal lives, in our businesses. And that, for me, is where anti-fragility comes in as a really motivational concept, because it's a lot more than just getting back up again and dusting ourselves off. It's about gaining from disruption, getting stronger in difficult times, benefiting from adversity. It's more than just resilience.
Even more than just being a motivational concept, it is really a systemic concept that is about how do we build our systems to actually withstand some of those challenges. So if we're being a bit poetic, we could say wind extinguishes a candle and energizes a fire. So if you want to be the fire, you need to wish for more wind. And so join us in this episode to find out how you can use anti-fragility for success into the future. In a world characterized by constant disruptive change, organizations, leaders, and teams need to have certain qualities that not only help them survive, but also thrive and excel. So the question is, how? And one important answer is be anti-fragile. So Graeme, what is anti-fragility?
That's a good place to start, because it's not a word that we use. It's not a word in our language. I don't know, Buhle, you know more languages than me. Does the concept of anti-fragile exist in isiZulu, for example?
I do not think I can come up with one off the, just off the fly, but it is not a concept that is easy.
Yeah. Let's explain it. So fragile objects or systems are those that are easily broken. If you hit them, they break. If you drop them, they smash. So that's fragile. That's easy to understand. And we think that the opposite of that is something which won't break if you hit it. So that's resilience. If you hit it, it doesn't break. If you drop it, it doesn't smash. It just stays solid. And it's that whole, I get knocked down, but I get back up again. You can't keep me down. But that isn't the opposite of fragile. It's not anti-fragile. It's just not fragile. And I'm not trying to play with words, because anti-fragile has the sense, if you understand that concept, of if I hit it, it will get stronger. If I drop it, it withstands, more than just withstands the shock. It actually improves because of the shock. It gets better, improves, gains from stress, disruption, and disorder. So that's the concept. We want to do more than survive the shock. We want to get better because of the difficulty.
And I think that should be of particular interest to leaders as we thinking about the future, because change is here. Disruptive change is here, and it's here to stay. You can't wish it away. You can't say, I'm tired of this. I don't want to deal with this. And we do need to give some credit to Nassim Nicholas Taleb. His famous book is probably Black Swans, in which he talked about massive disruptions, which is similar to our gray elephants list that we shared on episode 1 of this podcast. In 2010, he wrote a follow-up book called Antifragile, and that looks at things that gain from disorder, in which he argued that antifragility is our best preparation for disruption. really, really great resource that we have looked at ourselves as we think about antifragility. But of course, we're expanding that to actually look into the future of organizations as we go forward. Yeah.
This is a case, Buhle, of we kind of curse the people who had our original thoughts before us. I'm smiling a bit. We were working on, in the mid 20 teens, 2014, 2015, we were working on trying to come up with the ideas of organizations that were disruption proof. And we came up with a few of the principles we'll be sharing in this episode. And then somebody said to me one day, they said, "Oh, you mean anti-fragility, like Taleb's book?" And I said, "What are you even talking about?" And then I went and realized, like 3 years earlier, he had written this book, and it was exactly the concept. I'm not necessarily going to recommend the book, not because I don't think you should read it. It's a very difficult book to read. For whatever reason, Taleb likes to make his ideas very complicated. He argues with people. You can follow him online and see what I mean. But the concept of anti-fragility is absolutely elegant. And so we're borrowing the title and the idea, but it is a great concept. It doesn't exist in languages, but once you understand the concept, you kind of think it should exist. Well, then maybe, Whitley, that's the question. Does it exist? I mean, is it just a concept, or is there actually anti-fragility in the world?
Well, the truth is that it actually does exist in reality. As a matter of fact, life on planet Earth is a result of anti-fragility. I've been enjoying watching that documentary that looks at life on planet Earth, and you can see that no matter what has been thrown at us, as different species that are on planet Earth, it's actually been that ability to bounce back that has allowed us to get to the point where we are today. So you think about trees, for example, trees that grow up to 2 meters in height. That's a result of them being able to withstand the winds and be able to thrive through that and dig their roots even deeper. And so, yeah, in nature, it definitely exists. But it also exists in our own bodies. And you have been doing something quite strange, Graham. You've been preparing for the Order Challenge.
Well, you
I
call
mean,
it strange. I think some people might call it my midlife crisis. But yes, let's call it strange.
so for those who don't know, the Order Challenge, this is a 42-kilometer trail run with 2,400 meters of elevation change in less than 10 hours. You are crazy, my friend. But but what you've been doing leading up to this challenge is really what's been really interesting, where you have been pushing your body, you have been putting it under tremendous stress, and you haven't just been doing this by yourself. You've had a support of a professional that's been guiding you and helping you, and it's been very fascinating to watch for all of us. But what's happening in that process, Graham, is something interesting, right?
Well, I suppose these are the anti-fragility systems. So like a tree that if it grows to more than 2 meters indoors, it's going to fall over. But it's had to be pushed by the wind. By the time it gets to 2 meters, it's developed the strength to be able to grow as high as it wants to. The same with my body. When I started this process, I actually went too fast, too far, too quickly, and got an inflamed meniscus and had to have physios and biokineticists helping me to build the strength up in my muscles. And so I suppose if people are taking notes, let's tell them that there are obviously some principles here. I think 3 principles. You need stress in order to grow. So if you're wanting to grow, let's now make this business principles, because of course that's where we're heading. If you want to grow, you need to have stress. So your goal as a leader can't be to remove all difficulty, all things that could cause uncertainty and volatility and that in your business. But the second principle is you don't want too much stress. on your business, on your people. Otherwise, you get that injury. You hurt yourself. If you're a tree, you uproot yourself, and then you're dead. So you want to manage that stress as a key part of being anti-fragile. And then the third principle is that recovery is important. And again, let's use business language here. We want people to be productive, to work hard, to be efficient and effective. But then we also need to make sure that they've got moments when they can breathe and relax and recover and develop. And we're not talking evenings and weekends here, but this needs to be part of their working contract with you. So there's a lot of lessons actually to learn from the anti-fragility of nature.
I love that. I think as business leaders, we can think about sort of like what are the cycles that we go through in business. So, do we allow those cycles to actually help us to be anti-fragile? And so, if we were to look at those three principles, we can look at the cycles where we deliberately introduce stress into the system because we know that stress is going to bring some elevation in some points, and then also being able to actually balance that it's not too much. And then the last part is to say, okay, what are the periods in our business where we allow for the recovery to take place, and so on. And so when we think about the examples that we've mentioned up until now, we've been talking about examples in the natural world, but the question is, do we have any examples, or what does anti-fragility look like in business? And I think we do have a great one there, Graeme.
We do. I think you could almost pick any industry, but maybe the airline industry is the most obvious one to imagine, because in MBA language, it's about sector adaptation after individual failure. Okay, don't switch off the podcast yet. We're not moving into MBA geek speak yet. What we mean by that is if one business in an industry collapses, fails, has a problem. In the airline industry, if an airplane crashes, what happens is we immediately send out a team of investigators. They look through the wreckage. They're looking for what we call the black box. It's actually bright orange, so it's easy to see and find. We recover it. We analyze the data. We want to know as quickly as possible exactly what happened, what caused the calamity. And then, and this is the interesting part, Buhle, is we don't keep that data hidden. You would imagine that the airline might say, well, we're going to hide the data and not show anybody else because it was a failure. In fact, they do the opposite. They share that data with every other airline. And the reason for that is that they know that if there is a problem with that particular make of airplane, they want all the other airlines in the world to fix the problem immediately, not take off if there's that problem in another 10, 20, 100 airplanes around the world, because then everybody feels more confident about the industry. They often say that the safest time to fly is immediately after an airplane has crashed, because everybody in the industry is focused on becoming anti-fragile, learning from the crash to become better and safer the next time you fly. So that applies to all sorts. A restaurant closes down on a particular in a shopping mall, and then all the other restaurants ask, well, why? Well, what did they do wrong? What can we do better? So that applies across multiple industries. But actually, this concept of anti-fragility exists all around us. We maybe just didn't have the label for it, and now we've got the label. We need to learn how to build it into our own businesses.
Such an excellent example, that airline industry one. And I know that we've already touched on a few principles of anti-fragility already. But now we're going to just delve in a little bit more into what are some of the different principles that we can see. But let's start with a quick summary to help you remember them all. And I think this way of thinking about anti-fragility, sort of like a simple approach, is to think about it. Think about the head, the heart, and the hands.
So the head is what do we need to be thinking about? And in particular, if you've been listening to the other episodes of this podcast, you'll have heard us talk about what do we need to rethink and unlearn. So the first part of anti-fragility is realigning the way that we think about the world around us, giving ourselves a longer term perspective and developing our strategic imagination and our longer term view. That's the head.
The heart is about shifting from control to empowering our people by promoting autonomy, excess capacity, and a focus on peak performance. And that's about aiming to get the best out of our people, not just the most. And I think often that gets missed when we, because again, looking back at our previous episodes where we're looking at the different eras, if we are bringing the industrial era way of thinking, we will want to get the most out of our people. And that's not the same as getting the best out of our people. So that requires your heart to actually be more active here.
So we've got the head, we've got the heart. The hands are what we must actually do. And that is about building a culture of experimentation that encourages learning, diversity, feedback, planning for the unexpected. But it's not just something that you can think about and then you'll come up with the best ideas and then you go and implement them. We live in a world now where you've actually got to try things out and see whether they will work or not. So that's why we talk about that as the hands. So head, heart, hands. It's a nice way of summarizing, but we've got a lot more detail that we can go into.
And so if we're going to be successful in becoming anti-fragile and building anti-fragile systems, we really need to go beyond just the cosmetic, the look and feel, and go into the heart and of the matter here. So Graeme, take us through some, and we'll go back and forth and just look at what this looks like.
Yeah, so maybe the best way to do this is to, in your mind, have company A and company B. And company A is a fragile organization that if difficulty happens, if they come across tough times, they're going to really struggle. They're going to collapse. And company B is an anti-fragile company. So they're going to get stronger. Remember, it's not just resilience now. We're wanting to say it's getting stronger when those things happen. So we'll compare and contrast these. So fragile organizations are short-term focused. I think, Buhle, this is what you've just been talking about. It's like we focus just on getting today's job. You can feel the leaders telling you, we've got to deliver this month's sales numbers. We've got this quarter's results to put through. So we put off maybe longer term decisions. We put off, maybe you talked about the DNA. We put off cultural conversations because it doesn't matter if there's a toxic sales manager in one of our divisions. As long as they're delivering the numbers, brilliant. But in the long term, that's going to dig into, this is a cultural conversation, isn't it? So short-term focused is fragile. What does anti-fragile look like as a contrast to that?
Yeah, so becoming anti-fragile is really about opening your mind to unexpected futures. And so this is about bringing in that strategic imagination throughout the organization. As we have touched on this and we've spoken about it before in episode 3 and 4, this is about redesigning the way that we do things around here. So the cultural aspects become a big part of this. So where you look at things through the lens of who we are becoming, what we want to achieve, and how do we do it? So our differentiators. So anti-fragile organizations utilize all of these different aspects in order for them. So they're not just short-term focused. They tend to take a big picture perspective and look at things with a much broader view and a much longer term view that also involves thinking about their people, thinking about the systems, and so on.
As you say, we talked about that quite a lot in the previous episode. If you're listening to us now and this is the first episode you're listening to, I hope you noticed it was episode 5. You need to question your life choices and go back and start with 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a reason. that they're numbered. But episode 4 will give you a lot more information about that. Don't look at me that way, Buhle. I'm giving people real solid life advice here. Things should be done in the order they're supposed to be done.
Oh, we could, yeah, or they could do sort of like the Star Wars way of doing things.
Now we're going into loops upon loops. Right, let's move on. Enough of this nonsense. Fragile systems. Let's move to the next one. So fragile systems, and this sort of follows on from it. If you're short-term focused, you are probably focused on optimizing your existing system. So your focus is saying, this is what we've always done, this is how we've always done it, and how do we do it better? And again, you can see there would be value in doing that. Of course, if you can do what you do better, then do that. But if that is your main focus as a leader, as soon as the disruption happens around you, your business is perfectly optimized for a world that no longer exists. And that's why it becomes fragile. So an anti-fragile system has to do something different. An anti-fragile system has to be thinking, how might things change if things changed? So there's that strategic imagination piece again. If things changed, then what would we need to rethink and unlearn? So if we want to be very practical now, one of the favorite things that I know you and I both enjoy is it's actually such a simple question. We ask people to just ask and answer this question. What do you and your team need to rethink and unlearn about your business now? And that is a more powerful question and unlocks real responses in people that are more powerful than just the words feel. Our brains somehow link into rethink and unlearn. And what you're trying to do from an anti-fragility perspective is give yourself some scenario thinking. What would you do if the world was no longer set up for your business in the way it's been optimized? And I don't know, Buhle, what would you recommend? Maybe 1 hour a month of scenario thinking, or maybe even a few minutes every week as part of another meeting might be useful for this.
What's really interesting is for anything that we want to become part of the way that we do things in an organization, sometimes it's about, I love this concept of having moments. So what we've been talking about in organizations, we talk about a safety moment, we talk about a diversity moment in a meeting, or we have this and so on. And I think really, as we're thinking about this, it is about sort of like getting into a habit of having a future scenario moment in our organizations. And so as we do our meetings, we just spoke about this in the previous episode where we talk about the 5 minutes from the future. So whether you do that on a weekly basis or you do it at every meeting, I mean, that's absolutely up to you how you do it. But I think the key element, or the key point that we're bringing across here, is you have to make it part and parcel of how you do things in your organization, so for it to become part of your culture. And so if we take this then again, going back to the fragile and the anti-fragile organization or system, fragile systems are usually controlled from one source. And so they're controlled. And so the huge emphasis on who controls what we do in the organization is usually from one source, whether it's a management team or whether it's one individual. Especially we find this with owner-founded organizations or owner-run organizations, where basically the locus of control is just sitting in that one source, in that one place. But the opposite, or the anti-fragile system, takes a different look. And Graeme, take us through that, and an example as well that we can see from that.
Sure. So we want to distribute decision making. So in authoritarian or hierarchical structured organizations, those are fragile. What happens is that the people who actually need to do the work, the people who know what needs to happen, they either client-facing people, the market-facing people, they need to get multiple layers of approvals and authority levels, and legal and compliance has to get involved to make sure that they do exactly what the hierarchical system asks them to do. What anti-fragile systems do is they try and push that authority down as close to the action as possible, giving people permission on the ground to do what needs to be done without those layers of authority. There are hundreds of ways to do this. You can look at all sorts of different organizational systems. Some people like holacracy, if you know that concept. Other people prefer different ways of doing it. You can choose whichever way you want to do it, but the key principle for anti-fragility is push decision making down to where the work is being done. And maybe a good example here, if you are a sports fan and you're a fan of sports cars, whether it's a Formula One or NASCAR or any of them, any of the car races that require you to change tires or to refuel cars. I mean, the ultimate goal of those pit crews is the car screeches into the garage, the crew jumps on that car, and within a flash of seconds, they can have changed tires, replaced a part of the car that was broken, refueled it. It's astounding to watch. But you realize you can't have a boss in charge who's now saying, right, next thing to do is the front left wheel. Each person in that team is absolutely empowered to handle their part of the system. And if something goes wrong, you don't see 10 people jump in to try and solve the problem. If one of the tires gets stuck, it's the person's job who's dealing with the tire to identify the problem, fix the problem. If he wants help, he must call for help, but it's his choice. And he has the authority in that. So it's a sports example, doesn't always translate, but whatever you can do, the third principle here of anti-fragility is to distribute decision-making. It's probably one of the most significant and one of the most difficult for old school leaders to do.
It's absolutely a difficult one to do, but one that definitely needs to take place if we're going to succeed. Yeah, go on with the fourth principle.
No doubt. So the fourth principle then is that fragile systems are designed for efficiency above all else. I think that speaks for itself. This is an organization that measures and rewards productivity, efficiency. Maybe they're still old school and have timesheets, and you've got time codes for everything. And at the end of the week or the month, your boss will look and say, what did you do with that 15 minutes? And, you might be sitting in your chair saying, I was just drinking a cup of coffee and trying not to have an existential crisis. And now you want a time code for that. But that's an extreme of toxicity. But I think we know what it feels like, where there's just no break, no let up. And it's just absolute, what would be the right word? Just relentless pressure. And your reward for getting to the end of a quarter or the end of a year and succeeding at getting to your targets. Do you know what your reward is, Buhle? Your reward is, we make your targets higher next year. And we just reset you from tomorrow morning, new quarter, bigger targets. And you're just like, no. So that's a fragile system. Buhle, what would an anti-fragile system look like? In that space. I know this is, you love this. This is now the hot stuff we're talking about.
Absolutely. It focuses more on peak performance and innovation, creativity, resilience, and agility. And all of these are factors that allow free time and excess capacity into the system. And so what we touched on a little bit earlier when we were talking about the heart, where most leaders have been trained in the way of thinking that says, get the most out of people, and that's push, 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 push. To build anti-fragile systems, we need to be changing the whole, and so the whole way of thinking about it. One of the things that I often talk about, Graeme, when I speak on unleashing your greatness. I often speak about the fact that to be the best that you can be, you need to be who you be. In other words, you need to find what is it that sets you apart from everybody else. Find out what your distinction is and be allowed to flourish in that. And so that's what peak performance is talking about. And so as leaders, we need to be moving from the mindset of saying, how do we push people to get the most out of them, to saying, how do we create the right environment and and the right platforms for people first to discover who they are, what's the best that they bring to the organization, and then also then how do we allow them to innovate, give them space to be more creative, give them space and free time, and even allow them the capacity to actually achieve more. I know that this might sound like a lot of buzzwords, but I really thinking it's about leading from the heart and creating an environment where people can actually really flourish. And so that's what anti-fragile systems do differently to what fragile systems do.
And Buhle, when you say that we need to give people some free time and excess capacity, I mean, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about the 4-day work week, give everybody a long weekend? Are we saying people must have extra days of leave, or is it just little bits here and there? What have you seen working best?
I love the sort of like what we see organizations do, and so encouraging employees to spend a percentage of their time on projects of their choice, for example, on projects that they're really passionate about, and we've seen when organizations build that into their systems, how much more just out of the box ideas come as a result of that. So when we talk about free time, we're talking about that. But also we're talking about just actually building into the system the ability for people to be to sort of like be free to decide what is it that they want to do. So it's not necessarily about thinking about just new project or coming up with their own projects, but also just that free that ability to allow them to have that opportunity to just have the free time to decide what they do with some. Now this is very hard for leaders sometimes to get their heads around, but we've seen that when we lead with trust, trusting our people, that actually then allows that to happen. When we talk about access capacity, again we are talking about trusting people to actually do more than what their job title limits them to, and so expanding people's horizons, expanding people's opportunities, and when we do that, people actually become more and deliver more than we would have received from them if we didn't allow them just that access capacity from time to time.
Some companies have built that into their DNA. So 3M very famously has their 15% rule, which encourages certain employees. So it's not everybody. You have to earn your rank and status in the business to be given this 15% rule, but it allows people to experiment and to choose projects of their own choice. And then in some instances, even mandates that we are going to measure that 15% of your revenue for your department comes from a source that didn't exist 4 or 5 years ago. So you can still build in quite hard business measurements and business tools. We're not talking about creating a place where everybody's just playing and having a lot of fun and nobody's working hard. But I think, Buhle, it comes back to that word you used, trust. If we really do trust that people want to give their best, then creating a space for them to give their best rather than their most is important. And if what Buhle has just been saying to you feels like too much, the starting point might simply be normalizing taking lunch breaks again, saying to people, get away from your desk, step away from your inbox, normalize finishing meetings 15 minutes early and saying to people, don't go back to your desk straight away. Take this time to reflect, to think, to recover. Just build these little micro mindful moments into your day. It recovers your energy. We know the science behind this. This is the crazy thing. We know the science behind human performance, behind peak performance. We just don't seem to be applying it in our workplaces. So we spend quite a lot of time talking about this particular one, but it's so important. Anti-fragility actually comes down to the anti-fragility of the human beings in your system.
Absolutely. Now, Graham, I know that you and I, we have a huge list that we actually go through when we take organizations through the anti-fragility workshops and consults that we do. Uh, but I know that we're not going to exhaust all of them in this episode. But we cannot leave this one out, and I'm passionate about this one, and so another one is that fragile systems want conformity, and so the systems that want everybody to sort of like act the same, do the same. We employ the same kind of people. We look for the same idea. We look for the ideas from the same sources, and so on. Those organizations tend to be very, very fragile because then they're susceptible to the challenging, ever-changing ecosystem that they find themselves in. In order to build anti-fragility, organizations and systems need to value diversity. And we talk a lot about this when we're talking about building adaptability and adaptive leadership. But so when we think about this, when we think about diversity in this context, how does it look like, Graham, in this context?
I suppose what we're really saying is that maybe the current DEI approach needs we need to rescue it from the culture war that it's become. I think it's become something that it doesn't need to be, and there's arguments about whether we're doing it too much or not enough and doing it in the right ways or not. But diversity it's an asset that needs to be nurtured. And in an anti-fragile system, diversity, just forget business for a second, in an ecosystem in nature, if you only had one type of animal in a game reserve area, they would collapse. There are these symbiotic relationships. And if in human environments, in businesses, we need to maintain balance and resilience and innovation by having people with different approaches, different worldviews, all bringing richness and vitality to the ecosystem with different perspectives. People know this, but it is difficult to implement. But it is something that can be measured. And if we rescue it from the culture war that some people have made it becomes an important characteristic of anti-fragile organizations.
And we have seen that organizations are actually doing this right. And when they get it right, it's important for us to celebrate and to pause and to say, okay, this was an example of how diversity led into an anti-fragile system that actually helped the organization to move forward. And Procter and Gamble's focus on diversity actually pushed this organization to increase their perspectives and to think about the different stakeholders and to come up with new lines of products that allowed them to reach diverse consumer groups in the way that they wanted to be reached. And I think that's what diversity does. It brings you different perspectives so that when you have a decision to make, when you have a choice to make, you are not making it from a limited source of worldviews of way of or perspectives, but you allow yourself to have these different perspectives, and also you allow yourself to actually come up with different options and in order for your offerings, in order for you to actually make the most of your organization. And so the way that we think about diversity when it comes to fragility and anti-fragility in our organizations needs to change and it needs to be looking from this perspective. But yeah, Graham, there's so much here that you know,
Yeah,
I feel that.
we could go on for forever, and I'm watching the time like you are because we don't want to keep people for hours and hours. Maybe let's just do one more principle each. Obviously, people know if they want to go into more detail, they can contact us. There's plenty more where this comes from. Let me give one. I'll let you then give one more as well. Fragile organizations tend to keep leadership discussions private. And the systems are bureaucratic, right? So we are a rules-based organization, and we don't open source what we do. Whereas anti-fragile systems are built on sort of open source thinking. Everybody's invited to contribute. It's built on autonomy rather than bureaucracy. So we're trusting people to do things, and there's psychological safety. People feel I can contribute here. And if there's a rule that doesn't make sense, I'm not going to get into trouble if I ask about it. I've just come back from the United States traveling, and the United States is the only country in the world, as far as I know, that still asks us to remove our shoes when we go through the security check. There's no reason to do it. There's absolutely nobody has taken a bomb onto a plane in their shoes. No other country in the world does it anymore because it's just a waste of time. It clogs up the security system. But how do you, as an employee of the TSA in America, the transport security people, how do you say to your boss, I don't think we should do this anymore? There's a mindset in sort of government America that's very much a fragile mindset. It's a mindset that says we just keep doing what we've always done. Please don't question the rules. And so anti-fragile organizations make space for people to engage with leadership about changing the rules.
So I'll take the last one then, and this might be a difficult one for some leaders to swallow because fragile organizations or systems tend to have reliance on detailed planning and control, and a difficulty in adapting to surprises. And I know that part of the reason that some of you listening to this are leaders is because of your ability to plan and your ability to control things. And that's the reason why you have been chosen to be a leader. But if we build systems that only rely on planning and controlling and are not open to adapting to surprises, we'll find that we'll build these very rigid, fragile organizations that are susceptible to breaking when challenges come. And so what we need to move towards in terms of being anti-fragile is a focus on adaptability and learning, less reliance on detailed upfront planning. I know this is going to be hard for some people to swallow, but we are not saying ditch planning. We're not saying ditch thinking about the challenges that might come. No, we're saying create adaptability as a way of doing things. In other words, create that culture of experimentation, create a culture that allows you to be ready for whatever may come, and so build that in as a way to do that. And so the example that we saw during the 2020 pandemic was that many companies that didn't have this built in were not able to change their plans and change their targets and continued trying to plow ahead with a plan that no longer made sense. And so to become a more anti-fragile organization, yeah, adaptability and prioritize learning, ongoing learning, and adapting as the changes happen going forward. And a big culture of experimentation as a way of doing things.
So you can hear Buhle and I are passionate about this. I think that anti-fragility should be the word of the decade for the 2020s. I think it's a gift to organizations and to leaders to think about it. There isn't a golden plan that you can follow. We've given you 7 things to think about here as principles. We've given you a simple way of thinking about the head, the heart, and the hands. But really, the most important thing is for you to have this conversation with your team. What do we need to do as a team so that disorder is seen as something positive? That uncertainty and chaos and difficulty and threats will cause improvement and growth and development in our systems. If you can do anything, whether it's the head thinking about the world around you and changing your horizon, if it's the heart, how you engage with your people and giving them space and trusting them to give their best, not just their most, whether it's the hands and experimenting and trying things and seeing what happens and being prepared to do things that don't quite work out so that you can find the things that will. However you approach this issue of anti-fragility, do it. And make it a priority for your business, make it a focus for your business over the next few months and years. And yeah, we've got plenty more we can offer. Please be in touch with us if we can help you with this issue and this concept a little bit more in your teams. In every episode, we have a short segment where we do a book or a resource review. And today I want to highly, highly recommend a book called Turn the Ship Around by David Marquette. It's also a lovely 12-minute long video, which is called Greatness by David Marquette. And obviously in the show notes, we'll put links to both the book and that YouTube video. David was a commander of a nuclear submarine in the US Navy, and he was being moved to the latest, greatest submarine, and he spent 2 years preparing to become the great commander of the best submarine. And then at the last minute, they shifted him and they said, actually, you know what? We'd prefer for you to work on our worst submarine with the worst performing crew. We think you're the only guy who can turn the ship around. And he did, is the short version. Read the book and watch his video for the details. But he did that by realizing that he couldn't act like a Navy commander. If you've watched any movies, you'll know that especially submarine commanders tend to just shout orders and they got supreme authoritarian control over the submarine. He realized he didn't know the submarine, he didn't know the crew, and he needed to do it differently. And he's kind of stumbled across what he calls intent-based leadership. And you need to read the book and watch the video to get the details. But the idea is very, very simple. If everybody on your team is clear about what needs to be achieved, in other words, if we're using this language of anti-fragility, they've got a sense of what we are doing, this longer term vision, the bigger picture. You're not hiding anything from them. The decision-making power is being pushed down to them and they understand their contribution. Then what you can do is, instead of giving instructions, you ask questions. And by questions, we mean one particular question. The question is this: what do you intend to do? So given the work that needs to be done, given the deadlines we're under, given what's happening right now in the world around us, Graeme, what do you intend to do? Now, if the person gives you a really horrifically bad answer to that question and you think, have you not been concentrating? You have to reschool them again. You have to make sure they understood the purpose, or you have to realize they don't have the skills required and give them a bit of competence. Both of those would be good things to discover, right? And both of those would be good things to do as a leader. If they give you an answer which could be a good answer, but it's not quite what you would have done, now you've got a choice as a leader. And our suggestion is that you take the choice of diversity. You say, okay, that's not how I would have done it, but let's go for it. You do it the way you want to. Let's check in regularly. I'm here to support you, but go for it. Autonomy, trust, diversity, all those things we've just been talking about, good anti-fragility things. What you're hoping for is that they give you just a brilliant answer. They give you an answer which says, yes, that's exactly the right thing to do, and go for it. And then you have transferred the psychological control to them. They have not had an instruction from you. They have told you what they plan to do. And then they go and do it with a lot more psychological commitment and a lot more energy. It really is a lovely link into what we've been talking about anti-fragility, intent-based leadership, and you can read about it in Turn the Ship Around by David Marquette. Highly recommended.
We always like to end each episode with some questions that you need to consider. The first question is, do you understand whether your organization is fragile, resilient, or anti-fragile? Because understanding your current status can be key to helping your people navigate the changes that are required for the future of your organization. Secondly, what adjustments do you need to make to become an anti-fragile system, team, or organization right now? So go back to what we spoke about earlier when we spoke about the head, heart, and hands to better focus your efforts for maximum results. Because you might find that the question is lying with the head part or the hands part or the heart part. And so if you focus on that, you will find better results going forward. And then lastly, anti-fragility is not a once-off exercise. It's an ongoing process that needs to be built in order for you to lead and organize your organization successfully into the future. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Tomorrow Today podcast. We hope you found it insightful and helpful for your business journey. So please go ahead and check the show notes to recap on what was covered, and follow us on social media with the links that are provided. And remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening to it right now. See you in the next episode of the Tomorrow Today podcast, Mapping the Future of Business.